On March 5, 1995, 2 years after the murder of Shadain Aron, the Canadian Airborne Regiment marched its last parade, another victim in a search for scapegoats.
I thought the circumstances under which they were eventually disbanded, which was more associated with their distasteful hazing methods than with the actual crime in Somalia, sent a bad message to the Canadian military that when the going got really, really tough, right, the soldiers would be thrown to the wolves off the sled, and the people higher up would escape any measure of accountability.
I didn't ever have any expectation that the regiment would be disbanded over it, and that certainly came as a shock to me and everybody else there. But I know that everybody was willing to be above board and honest and get it dealt with, and yes, there was the hope that this would be, a bad would turn into a good, that things would evolve and, wrongs would be righted.
Everybody is tarred, and everybody feels like they were part of the scandal. The sense of these people being persecuted and the military being that close to disappearing in this country, there's a very real sense of that.
None of us saw it as the defining factor of the tour, and something we all hate is it's the defining factor of the tour. We did a ton of good there for the small time we were there, but I hate to, we were all painted with this huge brush that the story itself had such momentum that, this is where that, now there's Nazis in the ranks, which there wasn't. Now it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Part of the tragedy is that no armed body in Somalia made a deeper and more favorable impression on the Somali people than did the Canadian Airborne. Those guys started digging wells, replacing pumps, getting generating stations going. What the Somalis are saying, for goodness sake, don't let your guys go home. We need the Canadians here more than any other armed body. They're doing wonderful work.
General Johnston, who was the overall force commander, an American, 3-star, told me that the Airborne Regiment was the best unit in his entire, I think, 14,000 person force. And he said, it's not because they're better soldiers. He said, I'd like to think my American soldiers are just as good as your Canadian soldiers, and they probably are. He said they're outstanding, but they're not necessarily better than anybody else here. But it's all the extra things they do. Your guys, at the end of the day, figuratively, go out and build schools, find an orphanage, fix it up, purify the water in the town. Their wives and spouses and kids from Petawawa, in this case, send chalk and chalkboards over and crayons and paper. The government doesn't do that. The spouses of your soldiers do that, and then these guys set up a school. In fact, they set up 4. I saw them myself.
The disbanding of the airborne is kind of, here's the punishment now. Here's, if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. If the airborne offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. Forget about its distinguished history that goes back for generations. Forget about the other work it was doing. This will be the communications coup, right? This will be the public relations salve to put on this national wound. I thought was very weak and showed exactly the dishonor for those who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces that we should be trying to avoid. Is the exact opposite of national honor.
The biggest black mark that we suffer from Somalia is the fact the High Command, to protect the image of the Canadian Forces, decided to cover things up, which I think is quite clear that they did.
I don't know whether the crime, and I believe it was a crime, to attempt to withhold this information from the civil authority, whether it was committed in the field or whether it was committed in National Defense Headquarters. And I believe to this day that only a public inquiry like the Somalia Commission could command the resources and the authority to get documents and so on, examine people, cross-examine people, and get to the bottom of it.